See, we've got some friends in the audience. Hey, Billy. Hey, Dave. And everyone else who's in the audience who's a friend as well. Not trying to discriminate.
They're all friends of PlexTrac, right? Well, thanks everybody for joining us. We'll go ahead and kick this thing off. We're excited to be sharing our first webinar of 2021 with you today. It's a 2021 New Year's resolution, empowering your security team. I know we're at the end of towards the end of our first month in 2021, and hopefully it's been a great start to the new year for everybody. We're sure enjoying getting to kick off the new year with some exciting stuff coming your way, not only from a PlexTrac functionality and feature perspective, but also just some great content. Just so you're aware, we've got a webinar today, and then if you join Paul's Security Weekly tomorrow, you'll get to hear me talk again, if that's of interest to you. But I'll be joining the Paul Security Weekly team tomorrow, and so we're excited about some stuff coming up as well that we'll touch on later in the episode. But thanks for taking some time. If you're a current customer of PlexTrac or a prospect, thanks for joining us. Hopefully you'll learn some more about what you could get out of your PlexTrac installation. If you're new to PlexTrac, definitely feel free to ask questions. We'll try to address questions along the way. The goal of today is really to talk about how do you empower your security team this year. What are some things that you can tactfully and practically address that will help you improve your security posture, help your customers improve their security posture if you're a service provider, and then how do you continue to address your talent shortage? Right, we all have a talent shortage within the space. So how can you address some of those needs, and then how can PlexTrac help? We've got some things that we're going to show off from a feature perspective that may be new to some of you later in the webinar. So definitely excited to show off some of those things. But the first part of the conversation, we're just going to talk around, what are some ways to empower your security team and improve your security posture down the road. So an ounce of prevention, is the old adage. So what can you be doing now to improve and continue to show progress in your posture later? How can you do more with less in the new year? We may be facing some challenges with being able to find the right people to bring on board from your talent perspective. You may be, having to deal with any kind of attrition within your organization. So how can you continue to keep pace with the ever-evolving threat landscape in the new year? And then what role does PlexTrac play in empowering your team to accomplish more this year and really improving their morale, improving the security posture, and overall helping your team grow into a safer and more secure 2021. So here's kind of the agenda for the layout for today. We'll have some discussion between me and Shawn and Brian. Definitely would love insight. Feel free to use the chat function to ask any questions, or the Q&A function to bring up any items of conversation that you might think are relevant to this conversation. And then we'll show off a few new features in PlexTrac towards the end, and then leave any other remaining time for Q&A. So Shawn, why don't we throw it over to you, and let's just kind of talk about what does it mean to empower the security team in 2021, and what are some ways that our customers and anybody coming in can really gain a better perspective on what they should be focusing on this year.
Sure, thanks, Dan. So I obviously, for those of you who know me, I come from a background in military leadership. And so we talk about how do we empower people. It really comes down to giving them ownership, but you have to give them ownership of something, right? And so in order to empower someone to accomplish a task, the planning it has to happen at the leadership level. And if you really want to empower someone to do something that's going to be meaningful towards an overall strategic objective, that objective has to be clearly defined, and it has to be communicated throughout the organization. And everyone needs to understand where are they being supported and where are they supporting others in those efforts, and how does their efforts fit into that overall goal. So, I've been through a lot of different sessions and a lot of different areas about, taking a look at what do we do for the next year. And it really all has to start back at, at the baseline, at that strategic level planning, right? And so, one of the things that I ran into a lot in my time in the DoD and in my time in the civilian space, specifically when it comes to offensive security, and that's really where I'm going to kind of focus some of my discussion today, is there really isn't a whole lot of thought and planning that goes into our offensive security efforts, right? It's like, okay, we want to sprinkle a little pen test, right? Well, what do we want to accomplish with that pen test? If you were to take a look at something like the MITRE ATT&CK enterprise framework, right? You've got, I think, 13 tactics now and hundreds of techniques. And there's no way that all but the most mature organizations with unlimited resources are going to be able to adequately test from an offensive security perspective all of the things that are there, all the potential ways that which an attacker can leverage vulnerabilities, exploits, misconfigurations, right? And so it really comes down to starting at that strategic level, because until you have that underlying objectives set of what you want to accomplish, you can't piecemeal it out. You can't give a piece of it to somebody and tell them, go forth and do this, and then also allow them to really appreciate and value what their contribution is providing to the overall effort.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point in terms of like methodical planning, right? When we get over, like my experience having built out a blue team at one point, and then also been on the offensive side, of the house. It can be very overwhelming with all the things that you might need to try to feel like you've got to accomplish when building out a security program and trying to address the ever-changing threat landscape. And I think one truly effective way to empower a team is to really lay out a process, and that's something that you don't need a tool or set of tools to do. It just takes some discipline, time to really sit down and say, like, hey, if we start to plan these things out now, here's how we'll continue to be more effective later. I was also an athlete growing up, and I think that an important aspect that was always drilled into me is when you focus on the fundamentals, you start with the small things, the bigger things will happen, right? And I think it definitely applies in the professional sense as well. Both on a personal level and a team level, when you do the small things right and you stay disciplined and focused and plan these things out appropriately, then the bigger things come, by just the nature. Similar to compliance, right? If you're planning out a compliance framework or addressing your compliance concerns, if you have a very diligent security program, compliance becomes a lot easier, right? It almost falls out, of a diligent program. So I think taking that step back and really empowering your team to say, like, hey, you have the authority, you have the permission to take some time to plan out what you're going to do the next quarter, what you're going to do the next month, what you're going to do this week, and then that helps keep the focus where it needs to be. I would also say that we obviously at PlexTrac really emphasize and focus on the proactive nature of your security program. When you're first getting started, or you're in an immature operation, security operations and the SOC really tend to be some of the focal points, right? And then vulnerability management, plays its role, and application security plays its role, and then the GRC and the pen testing functions kind of just fit where they're needed, right? It's all. I'm not going to say it's always an afterthought, but it's definitely not what the center of the focus has been traditionally, and I think both of our experience, it highlights the need for being, just a step ahead from a proactive perspective. So being able to say, hey, we're going to dedicate time this year to really mapping out our proactive assessment methodology and our proactive assessment criteria for what do we determine as success.
Dan, and there are so many disparate pieces that go into an information security program. A question that I've heard often is, how do I start planning, right? And where do I begin? So I did want to offer a very easy, free tool for folks, and it's just simply a document. So if you're from the U.S., you've already paid for this and with your taxpayer dollars. I'm sure you've paid for it somehow through your contributions to our economy. If you're not. But the National Institute of Standards and Technology put out a great publication. It's special publication 800-115. And if you're looking for how do I get started in my planning process, how do I do the things that Dan's talking about, integrate the various components of my information security program, this is a great document. It's not a long read, but it's their technical guide to information security testing and assessment. And this isn't going to be a webinar about that, but I did just want to point out that if you just look at what's covered in this, is that it identifies everything from the planning functions that we're talking, objective setting up front, how to set those realistic objectives, and then how to actually execute your various types of assessments, and then what to do with the information, overall. Because if you we have this saying in the military that 90% of the learning happens in the debrief, right? And if you spend all this time and effort to do great security work, but you don't actually capture the lessons learned from that, then it really was all for naught. And so, Dan, this is a webinar that we're focused on New Year's resolutions, even as we approach the end of January. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to offer some ideas for New Year's resolutions for folks as they're planning out what their effort's going to be. And specifically, I'm going to address mainly in these resolutions, offensive security. Sure. Yeah, go for it. Awesome. Great. So obviously the first one, if you haven't caught on in the first 10 minutes of us bantering, that I'm going to resolve to have a plan for my offensive security efforts in 2021, right? I'm not just going to decide that I've got budget going into Q4, or that I've got a requirement that I've forgotten about, a PCI requirement or something like that. And I'm just going to go out and, buy a commodity pen test without any clear objectives of what I'm trying to accomplish, right? And so what should that plan be about? How should those objectives be defined? Well, that's really up to you, but some considerations that I would look into. Number one, where do you have questions about whether or not the solutions that you have implemented are providing true value? I've gone out, I have spent a ton of money outfitting my SOC. Maybe I've invested in some of these awesome new automated threat emulation technologies. I've just upgraded my EDR. Ultimately, at the end of the day, everyone has someone that they have to answer to for how they're utilizing their resources, right? And everyone has to fight for budget the next year. But at the same time, we want to have truth data. We want to be good, not just save our jobs, right? And so I think that's a great place to start. What are the solutions that I have already put in place that I don't necessarily have the data on to build those, to really make the determination in the next year, is this a solution that I want to renew, or do I need to look for something else? So before I go on to my second, resolution, Dan, what are some things that you've traditionally seen that are difficult to assess the effectiveness of in your environment, and maybe some ways that you've gone about testing and getting some data to determine whether or not things are effective?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is why, I think why we're huge proponents of the MITRE ATT&CK framework. I loved when Northrop Grumman came out with kind of that attack life cycle, because coming from an offensive background, you always had kind of a different language that you were speaking with different people within the security program, and so being able to standardize on, like, this is what the attacker is actually doing in the environment in order to achieve their goals is ultimately your goal as well, to be able to understand their activities and be able to identify it as early in that process. So that was one thing that I definitely emphasized early on, was like, how do we know if we can detect some of these things or not? And we kind of took a step back. We said, okay, well, what do we have in place? We've got some good technologies in place. We have an email gateway filter. We have a next-gen firewall. We have a behavioral-based EDR type solution that it should be identifying what is good and bad behavior on the system that it's deployed. So we had some of those fundamental building blocks that were good technologies. Fortunately for us, we had a good support from the top in terms of letting us install these things and help change the culture of the organization. So we took a step back and said, hey, we've got all these good technologies. What are the things that we feel are our gaps today, right? So we kind of honed in on things like lateral movement and privilege escalation, right? We would hope that our EDR would help identify some of those privilege escalation. But the lateral movement was kind of tricky, right? It's like, how do we know if we're detecting some of these techniques? And so that's where we mapped out a plan to say, like, okay, we're going to spend the next 2 months just testing these things, and as part of our proactive engagements, these are the things that we're going to focus on internally. And I think that's an important aspect to keep in mind, is that your proactive assessments, your penetration tests, you don't have to do this full-blown assessment that achieves your PCI compliance at the end of the year, right? That serves its purpose. You should have a single, full scoped pen test at some point throughout the year. But leading up to that, you should be doing things in bite-sized chunks, right? Being able to say, like, hey, these are the tactics and techniques we're going to test along the way. And that's where MITRE framework really comes into, a huge advocate for you, being able to say, here are some things you should know. These are kind of like what I call the signature-based detections for the attack lifecycle. If we go back to our days around the olden days of just true signature-based antivirus, these are the signatures, right? That we have from the attack lifecycle today. And I think so being able to start understanding how can you detect these things is an important first step. And it doesn't have to be hard, right? You can start very small and actually feel like you're making good progress. And that in turn improves the morale of your team, improves and shows efficacy of the things that they're doing, and helps identify things to work on next.
Awesome. And as I go on to the second resolution here, the first resolution we just covered here was, I'm going to have a plan in 2021 for my efforts. My second resolution is I'm going to have a plan in 2022 for my offensive security efforts. And that might sound like that's an obvious thing, but you never miss an opportunity to institutionalize good process, right? And so if you've made the decision that I am going to take a hard look and a methodical approach to my offensive security efforts in 2021, before I get too deep into the weeds of what technical controls am I actually going to address in 2021, I'm resolving that I am going to first take a look at whatever existing processes and policies I have in place and modify them so that this planning cycle is repeatable next year. And we're not going to start on January 27th next year. We're going to start with having some key deliverables with named people or at least named positions. By 15th of November, I need nominations from my SOC. I need nominations from my red team. I need nominations, from my GRC side on what are the areas that we think that we don't have sufficient testing on our defenses in. And by institutionalizing those policies and processes, number one, if you get hit by a truck, it happens again next year, right? Never miss an opportunity to memorialize yourself, right? But we're
win the lottery, right? I mean,
yeah.
Here, right?
We're all technical people, and we gravitate very quickly towards wanting to get our hands dirty, and we want to get in and start talking about what we're going to do. But I think it is important to take a moment back, and that's something that even if you are just in mid-management, asking the questions of like, okay, great, you've asked me to do this. Where is this documented so that, and if it's not, here's my suggestions. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that the more process you have in place without it being a burden, right? Is, having clean ways to document these things. Obviously, for PlexTrac customers, Runbooks is a perfect spot for those. But in general, having a way to cleanly document how you're going to do things time and time again is really important, and it keeps everybody on the same page. It keeps your more senior engineers able to stay focused on the things that they want to focus on without having to do a lot of training of the junior engineers, without some kind of, formality around it. So I think that that's an important piece in any security program and in any operation, is that training. Before we go too far, there was a question in the chat that I think is a good one when we're talking about kind of mapping out how you plan your offensive program and how that relates with the SOC, right? This gentleman was saying that this is all great stuff, but the SOC team may still be kind of down in the weeds. They're buried, with their current process, right? Because sometimes you might consider the SOC team to have a little bit more of a mature operation in your environment. It's typically one of the first things that goes in, whether that's an internal SOC or an external team that's doing your managed services for you. So how do you fine tune these process with the SOC team? And my suggestion is that this is where tabletop exercises really come into play. We found great success of being able to dedicate some time and bringing in team members from all across the organization, including the SOC, to really walk through these tabletop exercises from an IR perspective, as well as from a purple team, quote unquote, purple team perspective, where these are some things that we're going to start doing in our environment. How are you detecting these today, right? So really getting into that collaborative nature is really important. And the more you can collaborate with those people, and everybody can kind of understand what piece of the of the pie you're fitting into, really helps on fine tuning your operations, gaining more trust with the organization as a whole, as well as building that confidence from your stakeholders. We like I said, we had good support from our top level executives. And part of it was due to the fact that they trusted us. They knew what we were doing and the importance of it, because we were including them in those tabletop exercises at the onset. They started to get a healthier respect for the amount of effort it took to really say, like, hey, we think we're having a ransomware incident. Here are all the things that we need to go look for, and here are all the things that we need to do in order to stop this as soon as possible.
And that question from Guy in the chat there is actually a great segue into my resolution number 3, which is, okay, great. I've decided that I'm going to have a plan. I resolved that I'm going to set informed and realistic objectives that will guide my testing efforts. And I'm not going to get more truth data on what a informed objective is, on what I should be looking for in my environment from a better source than the SOC, right? Because they are in the weeds every day, and they're seeing it. And even though they're seeing the things they see and not seeing the things they don't see, I know as an operations person, the thing that always has the hair on the back of my neck on fire is, what am I missing, right? Mm-hmm. I'm seeing all these things on a daily basis. This isn't what we need to set our objectives, because that's not an informed objective. I already know that I'm getting these alerts, right? Where are places that I'm seeing, I'm reading that other people are having incidents that I'm not getting any indications of anything? Is that because nothing's really happening, or because we don't have the proper sensors in place? We don't have them tuned properly. But at the same time, it's not just about the objective being informed, it's about being realistic. Last month, right before Christmas, I had the pleasure of partnering with one of our partners as they were performing a purple team engagement that, quite frankly, went pretty poorly. And it really had the root cause of the poor execution was that it was overscoped, right? And they bit off way more than they could chew. They did not, in the interest of trying to boil the ocean, they hadn't put enough effort into planning the execution of each individual component, which resulted in delays in executing those individual components because the operators didn't have the understanding, the tools, the infrastructure in place to do the things they needed to do. And so, and what is a realistic objective for execution? Honestly, you're not going to probably know that until you do your first thing, right? And you collect some data. Dan, obviously I'm sure you've been on overscoped and underscoped and all things in between. What are your thoughts on there?
Yeah, I mean, scoping is always going to be hard, and you're right. Until you really get your feet wet, in your first couple of engagements, you probably are going to overscope. You probably are going to overcommit. It's like, oh, we can go boil this ocean. and realize, oh, maybe we should have started with this little puddle right here. But I think that's kind of that living and learning experience. So, I think that's perfectly normal and natural in any environment. You're going to see that, and that's where those processes and that documentation comes into play. Is like, hey, what? Here's all that we had planned to do, and in this 2-week time frame, or however long it was scoped for, we were only able to accomplish this. So that starts to kind of set your baseline for not only the skill set that you have within your team, because we're always going to be have certain limitations based on just our environment, right? Whether that's budget, that's tools, that's talent, all those kinds of things. Time is always going to be a constraint. So being able to start to recognize what your constraints are and working within those. I think the other thing, just as there was another kind of follow-up question, was like, what happens when you see how bad things really are, how bad your SOC team might be, and that's the whole point, right? And that's, I think, what we're driving to, is that yes, you are probably going to expose things that you did not recognize were bad, and that's okay. That's better than ignorance is not bliss. And especially in the security space, so this now starts to give you an understanding of like, okay, here, and because you have this methodology now, you can say, okay, here are the things now we know we need to go work on. And by the way, we can come back and run the exact same assessment again, and now compare. Right now, we can compare what kind of detections were in place before versus now. And start to actually show real-time metrics and progress that is actionable, right? So I think that it's never an exercise of who's doing a bad job, and I mean, I think those kinds of things just kind of come to light. And if you have personnel issues, that's one thing. It's not really an intent of identifying the weak links from a talent perspective. It's more, what do we need to do as a team to get better?
It's almost like you're in my head, Dan, because resolution number 4 is I resolve to modify existing processes as a result of the lessons learned during my testing efforts. It's once again, going back to that, that concept of, most of the learning happens in the debrief. Well, that's great, but what do you do with those results, right? And am I actually going to take the results of any efforts, and when it comes time to make those decisions on resource allocation, resource utilization, things like that, that I'm going to start from a position of what have I learned? And that's sometimes tough, especially if you are living in a world where you're still doing all of your testing and assessments on spreadsheets and OneNote and things like that. Wrangling all of those lessons learned together and then distilling them down into a document. Number one, that's hard, right? Because at the end of an exercise, we all know what happens. Everyone scatters to the wind, right? And nobody drops off all their documentation. But number 2 is you wind up having to abstract things, right? And some of the nuanced details get lost, and you get left with a one-liner, this failed. Okay, great. Why did it fail? Did it fail because the solution wasn't technologically capable of the task that we expected it to perform? Or did it fail because we didn't tune it properly, because we don't have the people, or the people aren't trained, or things like that, doing that root cause analysis is an art. It really is. It's like, why did we not detect something? If the first thing that comes out of someone's mouth is the answer that you put down on paper and you take, you're wrong. Because almost every single time, as you start peeling back that onion, you start finding, okay, we have an eventual root cause, but we've got contributing factors as well, that we need to address moving forward. So, Dan, what are some of the challenges you've seen with taking the whole reason we're doing this testing, right, is to learn, and taking those lessons and then translating them into influence on decisions that you're making going forward?
Yeah, and I think this is where it really highlights the importance of having internal teams, or teams that are connected with you throughout the year. Right. And so whether that's an MSSP that is, they're there to help you, every day, versus the outside consulting firm or the outside assessment or audit that is really geared towards that spot check for the end of the year, or or wherever you have it in your life cycle, because a lot of context needs to be understood with these results of these assessments, right? And so having people in the team and understand, like, hey, this is why that execution, within this environment took place, right? It's because, they have these XYZ controls already and they know the environment, right? And so that's how you can then begin to document, hey, we know this was a risk, or this was an item that came out of the report, but here's the context of why it executed, and here's what other mitigating controls are in place. So I think that's an important piece to not lose sight of, whether you're just kind of getting started in a proactive assessment mindset, or you have this mindset up front, or like more mature, is that being able to understand that the context is king, with all of these assessments. Otherwise, like one of the pains that I always experienced as a consultant in a pen testing organization was, if that test got lost, right, and people didn't understand how to fix the issues or who was responsible for fixing the issues, we'd come back a year later and effectively write the same report, right? And so not being able to communicate effectively, like, hey, this is what you actually need to go work on, and how do we help you along that path, right?
Well, once again, you've teed me up perfectly for my last resolution for offensive security, which is I resolve to document everything from policies to technical processes so that we can build upon these efforts in 2022, which sounds like an easy statement, but it is hard for organizations that aren't tooled properly. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. I mean, nobody likes documentation, right? But it is valuable, right? And it's important, and it keeps everybody on the same page. And that's why, making these things as easy as possible, so that you're not burdened with a lot of fluff around the process of the documentation, but actually just getting to the heart of it, having a central place where everybody can see it, whether that's a wiki or some other kind of platform, to really understand, hey, this is our mission. This is what we're trying to accomplish with this program. And I think it's a programmatic approach in general, right? Is that, hey, we're not just going to go out and we're just going to have fun trying to test MITRE ATT&CK techniques and feel cool. It's no, there's an actual mission and a vision behind this program, and it is a program. We're going to do this methodically, and I think that's only going to become more important in the wake of what we've seen in the industry, the last several months. There's no doubt we're at a crossroads within our within our industry, from the SolarWinds attacks, and I think that those of us that have been around a long time know that the supply chain interdiction type of attacks are always going on, and it takes that assumed breach assessment to the next level, right? In terms of, we can't trust anything in our environment. Like, we have to move to this this zero trust concept, and be able to test accordingly and detect bad behavior within our environment. So I think that is only going to become more prominent this year. And so this is also helping set the stage. These resolutions really help set the stage for how do I address the upcoming wave. Whether it's going to be new regulation or increased scrutiny from lots of our vendors and those kinds of things. These things are going to start happening. Anytime something really bad happens, there's some kind of fallout from a regulatory perspective, as well as Absolutely. Just what processes need to be implemented better, right?
So Dan, we've discussed planning, we've discussed scoping, we've discussed documentation. If it's all right with you, look, there is no one silver bullet that's going to be your magical guide that's going to get you to complete success in all the resolutions that I've suggested. But I'd like to take a moment to maybe show off a thing or two in PlexTrac that might be able to help with some of these efforts. Great. So let me share the screen here. So if you've been around PlexTrac for a while, you follow us, you probably are aware that late last year, I think it was actually beginning of Q4, we released our newest module, which is called Runbooks. And Runbooks really is all about how do I bring together a rigorously defined and methodical approach with the actual testers who are doing the work, and bridging that gap between theoretical objective with practical and technical implementation, right? And so what I've built out is using the MITRE ATT&CK framework. By the way, in our Runbooks, we allow you to classify things according to various methodologies, a nice way of grouping things. But in the methodologies for the MITRE ATT&CK framework, I built out a number of runbooks. And what is a runbook? Well, first, let me go ahead and filter down on these, or actually, I'll just go ahead and show you here. So I built a series of runbooks here for Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4. Each one of these runbooks is focused on just two tactics, two phases of the attack life cycle, right? So if I were to, take a look at the Q1 plan that we have in place, I'm just pulling this off the shelf. This came out of my planning efforts after I worked with my SOC. I worked with my, my red team to determine what my objectives are going to be. And so now we've created our plan. So I'm gonna go ahead and just pick Typhoon Inc. and I'll begin this engagement. So by taking a very well-scoped look at the attack lifecycle, and particularly the two phases for Q1, initial access and execution, I can now say this is the guidance from leadership. This is the management decision that these are the areas we're going to focus on. But what's the actual work? How do we bridge that gap to what the people are going to do? And that's where Runbooks really comes in handy. So what does Runbooks allow you to do if you've never seen the platform? It allows you to script out a red team or purple team engagement, or quite frankly, any other sort of engagement. We've got plenty of people who are using Runbooks and things like incident management, right? And so all of what you see here, these are all procedures that are actually courtesy of Red Canary, their atomics. And they are all mapped to specific techniques that fall within these two tactics that we've chosen. You can see the technique ID that exists here. So we're actually at the point of execution of this engagement. It's Q1. I have a limited set of things that I want to accomplish. And so it's time to start actioning. My operators can hop in here. And we've built this out to really facilitate that collaborative type work. If you are doing any sort of engagement and you don't have your SOC involved, you don't have someone there detecting your detection, you're missing the whole point, right? We don't just want the red team to go in there and run rampant. How well am I detecting this is why we're doing it, right? So, we actually have scripted out here down to, the actual command line level, what the actual procedure is that we need to do to test a particular defense in our environment. And then our red team can make a determination, our offensive side, was this particular attack successful, right? If they want to pop in any attachments, any sort of screenshots or code samples, things like that, they're welcome to do that. I'm not going to, in the interest of time, I'm not going to give a full demo of Runbooks, but just want to give a little familiarity to everybody. They can add, hey, what happened, right? Thing went boom, right? And whatever other things that there were, and we automatically timestamp that for you. And if you've ever been part of a really good post engagement debrief, you know that the correlation of events is one of the most problematic things, getting everybody to bring together, when did you fire an attack? When did you detect an attack? Were we all on the same clock, right? By building the logging mechanism into the platform, it takes care of all that work for us. We can identify what targeted assets we were, add those, I can create an asset on the fly, just grab a particular asset. And then I can even add additional evidence that is unique to this asset. One of the things that we want to do is we understand that if you're testing everything, if you're testing 100 things, there's not going to be 100 things to talk about at the end. You're going to win in some places. And when I say win, I mean your defenses are going to do what they're supposed to do, or at a minimum, you're going to have the detection you need to do, right? Or you need to have. So not all the data that you collect is necessarily going to be valuable for the high-level reports. So we put in the ability to triage, whether it's an attachment or targeted asset, make those determinations, collect everything you want, and then decide what's important to you as you move on. And then if there is something here that is an actual vulnerability that's been identified, we can include this as a finding. And once we're done with this, we can mark this as completed. We've got some other workflow management things, the ability to assign red and blue operators, all those things that you would expect so that people know that the work that they're supposed to do. But at the end of the day, what we get is we get an actual record of the engagement, of actually what was done, and we go down to the level of having the raw data actually in the platform. And what is brand new that I think no one has seen before, Dan? Is that correct?
You're probably correct.
You know where I'm going with this, right?
Yep.
So let's say that for this particular engagement, the defenses were spot on. The SOC was rocking it. Everything was detected or blocked, except for this one particular attack, right? And so prior to the last few weeks, we've only got this one thing we included as a finding. That's going to be the totality of our report. But what about all this other great work and great data? This is the true success story. This is getting back to those first, resolutions we talked about. How do we set objectives? It's based upon what do we not know about what's working. So this, I would posit that your successes are just as important, if not more valuable, to your efforts moving forward. So when I submit this engagement, and for those of you who aren't familiar, what happens is all of the procedures get normalized into a standard PlexTrac report construct, and each one of the procedures then comes into one of two areas, maybe both, right? So in the example, I only selected one of the procedures that were test finding. We've got an actual vulnerability. There's an action item here, right? There's something to do now, and we have that. And this is what we've had before. But what's brand new and we're real excited about is we are now providing the good news as well, right? So you've got the ability to click into report procedures. And now all of those other procedures that you performed, those things that you planned to do and you actually did execute, and you validated your investment on your defenses, you've got the good news story there. You've still got the record of what you collected for this thing that you included as a finding, but any evidence that we had collected for any of these other procedures are here as well. And, Dan, maybe at that point, that's kind of a very high level overview of this new functionality. By the way, this isn't just a list. You can actually drill in. You can get all of the data that was either pre-populated in the actual runbook itself, or that you captured during the process of testing. It just wasn't determined that there's a vulnerability that requires remediation there. Now, Dan, this is really kind of the MVP of this good news storytelling, if you will, in reports. I know we've been working hard on the storyboards and the initial programming for where we're going next with this. You want to maybe talk about what's in store in 2021 for PlexTrac as we start looking more at this, what are we covering in our testing versus what's wrong?
Yeah, so definitely where this is headed is being able to provide analytics on your progress, right? Being able to execute the same procedures over and over. Are we getting better over time, right? And that's where that pass fail kind of, or that successful versus unsuccessful attempts, really starts to play a factor. So you'll see more analytics coming in the days ahead on being able to visualize this information, as well as coverage. We're actually going to be setting the stage for our own visuals around coverage. I think when we talk about the MITRE ATT&CK framework, the heat map starts to get very large and can get a little complex. We've got a new visualization coming that we feel at least helps identify coverage in a simple form, and then can help you identify the things that you might have missed in terms of your tests from a gaps perspective and being able to grow it. I will take one step back though, and one thing that is nice about this from the Runbooks procedures perspective and being able to identify the logs is you will start to now have a better understanding of your mean time to detection, right? Because in the traditional SOC world, mean time to detection is really a metric that is done forensically. And it will only be able to be done forensically from an attack, a real attack, because you have to go back and search through your environment logs to identify where do we see the first indicators of compromise, and so it's still a little bit nebulous. Maybe we didn't actually have when that attack actually started, right? And so with a concept of runbooks where you are actually saying, I started this on Monday morning at 8 o'clock. And none of the logs picked any kind of activity up until Tuesday at noon. You now have a defined window of time that none of your defenses were identifying anything. Whereas from the traditional attack perspective, Tuesday at noon is really when you first detected something, and you just have to make some assumptions as to when the other attack, when the other aspects of the attack actually started. So I think that's an important thing that you'll start to be able to identify from a metrics perspective on the mean time to detection, which obviously helps lead to more refined mean time to response.
One of the questions in the chat here was, hey, do you have some of those simplified visualizations that will do some of that storytelling, to the CISO and to the C-levels? And that's hard. It is. Dan and I we were in New York. Wow, it seems like a lifetime ago. It was about a year and a half ago.
Yeah, definitely not during COVID. Yeah.
But we had the opportunity to sit down with a board member of a Fortune 100 company and ask the question, okay, great, you sit on actually 3 different boards. What is it that you want to see? What makes sense? And unfortunately, they threw up their hands and they're like, I have no idea. She was like, I get a different set of data from everybody. And so I'm not really even sure, is this good or is this bad? Because everything's presented differently. But since someone did ask, it has been something we've been chewing on here, and we're really looking for great ideas on how to visualize. And when I say how to visualize it, there's also the what are we trying to visualize? And what we really do want to start pushing the needle on is how do we visualize how well we have actually tested according to our plan? Are we covering the things that we want to test this year? Just to be completely selfish, I'll solicit some feedbacks. This is something that Dan actually came up with. One idea that we have right now for, how can we visualize our testing coverage, right? And this is not in PlexTrac. This is just an opportunity. If you think this is great, let us know. If you think this sucks, let us know. We're all ears. If you've got a better idea, we're definitely all ears. We'll take your free ideas. But taking, obviously there's different numbers of techniques in the MITRE tactics, right? But normalizing that so you can get to something like a radar chart, and then allowing yourself to see, hey, for any particular engagement, what type of coverage as a relative percentage of the overall number of techniques, if you will, inside of that tactic, did I get from my December 20 testing or my January 21 testing? What's the aggregate of those things? Where do I still have gaps that I need to figure out, holes where I need to go and cover those things? If in fact lateral movement was in my testing program for this year, it may not have been one of my objectives. But yes, it is definitely a challenge to get to tell that story, because as much as I do love the MITRE framework and I do love the attack matrix, it's not pretty. When you've got to scroll left or right, no matter how zoomed in you are, it's very difficult to tell that story.
Yeah, and those are things that are part of our New Year's resolutions as well from the product side, is that we'll be helping and always soliciting feedback on ways to visualize that. We will also, one thing also to keep in mind is that our current analytics module does do a good job of communicating your current risks to the organization. So that is definitely a place. If you are new to PlexTrac, we have an analytics module that shows you, it shows you a detailed comparison. You can slice and dice your data based on how you tag information within the platform. It's all related to the findings that come out of these assessments. And so where we're focused on next is the procedures that were also executed during those engagements, and helping to kind of tell that story of, yes, we found 100 findings, but it took us 8 weeks, and it took us 100,000 efforts, 100,000 procedures to find those 100 findings, right? Versus, hey, we tried one thing, and it got us to the crown jewels. So you can communicate a good amount of risk today within the platform, and then we're helping grow that capability on the procedures side, which helps paint that better picture of a coverage and efficacy perspective.
Absolutely. So Dan, we as often happens when we begin to banter, we've gone a little longer in some areas than we intended to. So I'm going to narrow maybe our focus and just maybe touch on one more topic while we've still got a few moments remaining. Because I have one more resolution that I really want to share that falls outside of my offensive security efforts, right, or my purple teaming efforts. Because a pain point that I know that we're feeling is here at PlexTrac as we grow our partnerships is vendor risk management, right? We are both on the giving and the receiving end of vendor risk management.
Yes, very, very much so.
And so my resolution is that vendor risk management in 2021 is going to suck less. But it's true. We all want to be finding technical solutions, procedural solutions to the real problems that adversaries are presenting us. But at the same time, legal is looking to us as the only people in the room that can really manage our vendor risk management program, right? Tell me about some of the pains you felt there in your life.
Well, yeah, I think both when I was a director, CISO, we had kind of a standard questionnaire, kind of had to come up with on our own. Like, here are the things that we think, a vendor should answer to. We didn't have necessarily a standardized, questionnaire, or we kind of had some that some of the community members had shared. So that was a challenge, because it's like, hey, are we missing something that we should be asking these vendors? And that didn't seem right. But also, being a vendor now for organizations, we get questionnaires of all different sorts and flavors and varieties, and get similar questions, and we kind of don't have a clear, concise way of how to manage all these assessments. It's still a very manual process from a spreadsheet perspective, right? I don't know that we've gotten any questionnaires. Maybe we've gotten one that's been in more of an automated platform, but still very manual, even with some of the largest organizations in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. But Dan, there are some standards out there. Some folks have put together the SIG and the SIG Lite, and it would be great if we had a world where we could all agree upon a standard set of questions. That's probably not going to happen, but at least get some buy-in on that, and then have some sort of easy way to administer that. So, if I might I share a little more on PlexTrac?
Sure,
Great.
sure thing.
Because I'm going to do it live because I just got this file. But some of you know that we have an assessments library where we provide things that may be of value to you, like the NIST CSF assessment or the CMMC assessment. We've also got NIST 800-171. So if you give me about 5 minutes after this call, we will add to the website the newest addition to our assessments library, which we're excited to announce today. Let me get that off the screen to make sure that it's not showing. But we are now going to provide the SIG Lite, which, once again, this is an industry standard kind of collaborative and open questionnaire. It's 75 questions. It's actually really good. And if you need to get into more detail, there is the full SIG as well. So here is the SIG Lite. So I'll go ahead and begin this assessment. So first of all, let me talk about the mechanics and how this can make your life easy, right? So if you are somebody who has to collect vendor risk management questionnaires, third-party questionnaires from folks, I know it's painful now. We receive it in 500 different mechanisms, none of which are secure. We put all of our sensitive, honest responses into the data, have to get it back. But, how can we make this easy? So the SIG Lite can be delivered in PlexTrac. You can send, provision one of your partners with an analyst account that just gives them very limited permissions to come in and perform this. So we'll go ahead and do this for Contoso systems. And you can see it's a very, very, very smooth user interface. Some things that are new that you may not have seen in the assessments module if you haven't been in before. We've now added some great just workflow management stuff, right? So do I have a risk assessment program? No, I don't, right? We've got the ability, you can define whatever input fields you like. These aren't part of the SIG Lite standard. These are just some input fields that we added ourselves, right? We've also made it really easy to duplicate questions now. So the building of these is a breeze. The reason why I just imported this is because I had one of my team members building it while we've been on this webinar. So they actually did build out 75 questions in the last 50 minutes or so. But you'll notice as soon as I began providing data here, I've got a progress indicator now. And I can document whatever controls I have in place, maybe who answered the question, things like that. And then obviously we've got a place to add attachments, because oftentimes, these when I get these questions, when I'm in the receiving end, it's really nothing more than a laundry list of, do you have this policy?
Where's your policy? Yeah.
But I can mark this as complete, great, and keep going on down the line. If I want to come back to this later, I can. And what's really nice too is if I skip a couple questions, we've got some really nice new filters in place, so I can go and just show me those things that are in progress that I haven't completed yet. And now I can return to that question that I started and didn't finish. Just show me all the things that aren't completed, and I'll get my not starteds and my in progress. And then when, whether you're on the giving or the receiving end of this, it's super simple to manage this. And once it's ready for submission, you just hit submit. And the flow is very similar to Runbooks. All of the questions that are in this vendor risk management assessment are now going to be placed into the structure of findings, right? And all the data that was collected will be there. Any attachments, this is, in the interest of time, quick demo here, didn't add any attachments, but those would all be in our artifacts section. So yeah, we want to help you because vendor risk management is painful for us, so we know it's painful for you, and we want to help. So we like the SIG Lite standard, and if you give us about 5 minutes, this will be available at plextrac.com under resources documentation. Download it, modify it. It's really easy to modify these days. You can come in here, download it. And then, maybe you don't want to collect things like, what were the controls in place and who was the auditee. Maybe I want to, for each one of these, collect additional data, what are, observed gaps or something like that. They can self-report on things they know is wrong, right? Raise your hand. I know that this is already bad in my environment, but you can have as many of these as you want. Please download it, make it your own. You can pre-populate it with your own defined recommendations and references. We are going to put out a version 2 of this that is going to have some recommendations and references and other data as well. Use it if you like. Use the original version if you don't. So yeah, I know we're running real short on time here, but I did want to make that announcement. I know some folks have been asking, do we have anything already built for vendor risk management?
Right. Yeah. No, great stuff. And we've got a lot of cool, functionality that's new within the assessments module and the Runbooks module. So if you're a current customer, definitely check that out. If you're new to PlexTrac, please hit us up for a demo. We have a lot more to show you on PlexTrac and can really highlight how we can save you a lot of time. I think one of the key things that we always kind of come back to as a security industry is automation. Where can we automate as much as possible to really get the time back that we need? And one, obviously PlexTrac can help you in all those capabilities. The important thing to keep in mind though is once you have that time back, what do you do with it, right? And that's what's important. Is in order to help solve these talent shortage problems, automation is an important piece of that puzzle. The automation capabilities are going to get you the time back. Then you have to actually go deploy that time effectively to actually make more improvements and grow your team capabilities without needing to go hire more folks or spend a lot of time finding the right talent. But we're excited for 2021. Those are some of the resolutions that we've got. I'll open it up to the floor for 2 minutes worth of questions, or if anyone wants to share in the chat or the Q&A, like what are your New Year's resolutions? And by all means, hit us up later too. We'd love to hear what things you're focusing on in 2021 to make your team more empowered and successful.
I know we've had one member who's definitely had some great questions. I want to invite him to be a panelist in our next webinar.
Yeah,
you know who you are.
Sure. Yep. For sure.
So we've done a good job of peppering those answers in as we've been going along. So appreciate the folks who've been active in the chat and bringing those to our attention. So
very good. Well, with that said, we hope you all have had a good start to the new year. We wish you nothing but success and growth in 2021. And if you have any questions at all, don't hesitate to hit us up. You can also visit our website to learn more about PlexTrac. You can hit our YouTube channel to see a lot of videos on the functionality that we offer. And really, we're here to help you be successful. We're here to be your partners and your guide as you navigate the security industry and the threats and attacks that are coming in 2021, as well as what we've all seen and experienced in the last several years as well. So, with that said, thanks so much for your time today. Don't ever hesitate to reach out to us if you have any other questions. And we wish you nothing but the best in 2021. And stay tuned for announcements about our next webinar next month.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, everyone.
Yep. Have a good one.